British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he does not want a general election. He's urging lawmakers to vote down a bill that would prevent a no-deal Brexit. During a televised speech on Monday, he said he's optimistic that he can strike a new agreement with the European Union.
They can see that we want a deal. They can see that we have a clear vision for our future relationship with the EU, something that has not always perhaps been the case. And they can see that we are utterly determined to strengthen our position by getting ready to come out, regardless, come what may. But if there's one thing that can hold us back in these talks, it is the sense in Brussels that MPs may find some way to cancel the referendum. If they do, they will plainly chop the legs out from under the UK position and make any further negotiation absolutely impossible.
Over the weekend, protests broke out all across the country after Johnson said he'd be shutting down Parliament for 5 weeks. The move limits options for lawmakers to prevent the country from leaving the European Union on October 31st if Johnson is unable to reach a deal. Kevin Matthews is an assistant professor of history at George Mason University. He's also reported on British and Irish issues and politics. He's been on our show quite a few times talking about this very issue, Brexit. Never seems to be a final chapter. It's just like a new chapter. Talk to me about his moves, his speech. Where are things today, do you see him?
Well, I think Boris Johnson is either one of the most adept politicians ever or one of the most risk-taking politicians we're likely to see. What he said today was he doesn't want a general election, but it's clear that he does. He's been preparing for one ever since he became prime minister. He's hoping to box in his opponents. Parliament meets tomorrow. The opposition is going to lay down an emergency measure to prevent Johnson from crashing out of the EU at the end of October. If they succeed, they will only be able to do so with rebel Tory MPs. And Johnson has made clear that he will expel the rebel Tories and then call a general election. The problem with that is no one can say for sure when he will call it. He could call for the middle of October, as some say, or he could wait until after the after the UK crashes out of the EU on October 31st, go to the country, say that he delivered Brexit, and hope that he gets a majority before there is the economic calamity that's sure to follow.
A lot of folks saying October 14th, and there's also the rebels being chided as saying you can choose between the EU or Britain. Talk to me about this whole dynamic and what's going on. And Tony Blair actually calls this the elephant trap that Jeremy Corbyn could be walking into. Give me your sense about that.
Well, the Tory MPs would say that they're not putting the EU before Britain, they're putting the country before the Conservative Party. One thing that I think people often forget is that Brexit has always been about the Conservative Party. This referendum would have never been called in 2016 if David Cameron hadn't been afraid that the UK Independence Party was gaining traction. And ever since then, the Tories have been tearing themselves apart about what to do about this issue. Right now, it seems as if the hardcore Conservative Brexiteers are in charge. And Remainers, such as old veterans like Ken Clark, are the ones who seem to be on the outs. Boris Johnson thinks that he can bluff his way through this, but I'm not so sure he's going to get away with it. As for Tony Blair, Blair's big concern is for what is going to happen to the Labour Party. The Labour Party finds itself in a bit of a fix. Any other opposition party in this situation would be glad for a general election. But the truth is they're led by a man, Jeremy Corbyn, who is very unpopular in the country. They're 8 points behind in the polls. And Blair has pointed out that no party has ever won a general election that far behind. Having said that, back in 2017, when Theresa May called a snap election, Labour was 20 points behind, and they almost eked out a victory. They managed to destroy the Conservatives' majority, left them with a minority government ever since. They are dependent on the votes of Democratic Unionists from Northern Ireland. And who knows what would happen this time around. Johnson will probably try to go to the country on a platform of Parliament versus the people. He representing the people who voted for Brexit in 2016, which was a bare majority when you think about it, 52% to 48%. for something this consequential is not that large.
You mentioned Theresa May. David Cameron really never thought Brexit would pass either. These elections do come with some danger. Boris Johnson may be pushing the envelope. He says he doesn't want an election. A lot of people believe he does. It could go either way, though, couldn't it?
Oh, sure it could. He could come back with a majority. He's depending on capturing seats in old Labour constituencies that voted heavily for Brexit in 2016. But he's going to sacrifice a number of seats in the southeast that are affluent, that voted for Remain. He's also probably going to sacrifice a number of seats in Scotland. The Scottish Conservative leader Ruth Davidson revived the party. The Tories won 13 seats there in the last general election. She has gone because she could not abide Johnson's Brexit policies. And so it's, as I say, he's really rolling the dice.
And as he was giving the speech, you could hear all the chants outside.
Yeah.
Just how divided is this country right now?
Well, the country's split down the middle. And again, that's the other unfortunate thing about Brexit. Brexit was supposed to settle this question once and for all. And all it has done is consume Britain for the last 3 years so that the country cannot move forward on any other issue, whether it's healthcare, policing, environment, you name it. And instead, it's consumed by this issue, and people are just being driven further and further apart.
Kevin Matthews, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Glad to be here.
Appreciate it.